Okay, so I just finished programming for probably 10 hours or 11 hours or something, and I was working on my game, and I had some specific goals that I wanted to try and accomplish. And I feel like I accomplished some of those things, and then I got caught up in a bunch of other things. And it made me think a little bit about this difficult problem, which is a time management problem, but also just a general problem of what is the right thing to be focusing on, what is the right thing to try and make better, and when is it too much, when is it not enough. And I think, ironically, the answer to that is it's never really enough. Obviously, if you can make any part of your game or system or software better, it is effectively just a net positive. And that's why I said it's like more of a time management thing, which comes into another concept, which is a statistical measure, which is expected value. And expected value is like, how much bang are you getting for your buck? For every hour you're spending on something, what is it actually accomplishing? And if you're going to think about things in terms of expected value, you have to then make it even more precise and be like, is this about profitability or is this about making the best game? And I've seen some devlogs from different developers who I think have made some pretty interesting stuff, and they've come out and they've been a little bit sad about how their game performed, and they were reflecting on some of the things that they added to their game that they spent a lot of time on. And when they were reflecting on it after the fact, they were like, I probably shouldn't have done this. And realistically, where that's coming from is a human being that needs money and is discouraged because they didn't get enough of it. When you get enough money, then it's not a problem anymore for all of these people psychologically. You're not going to see videos from people justifying things they did once they cross a certain threshold, because that's human nature. Humans don't really need to rationalize when good things happen. They rationalize when something that wasn't as good as they wanted to happens. And unfortunately, it's a really intractable problem in a lot of ways, because you have to be able to predict the future to be able to say what is truly the best course of action and best thing to work on at any point in time. And from a really foundational level, it makes sense to take any part of your system and make it better. But today, for me specifically, something I was working on was trying to improve the user interface, which is really just a problem about, it's really a mathematical problem, and the math comes down to how efficiently can a human get to where they want to get within a system. And the more complex the data is in that system, the more the UI becomes a difficult problem to actually facilitate the human getting there in as few steps as possible, and with it being as intuitive and with the least amount of resistance as possible. And this is not really a science, and it's not a very simple thing, but I have my own thoughts about it, and I spend a lot of time focusing specifically on trying to make a UI better so that there's less time and more information at a person's fingertips as they're traversing the landscape of the game's information. And it comes back to the original thing, is this a waste of time? I don't know. Certainly when you look at the core of a game, it's about having fun, and navigating information is not necessarily directly correlated with fun in an obvious way. And that is something I worry about. I'm like, what does it matter if you make a system that's really efficient to move through if the game that people would be inspired to move through the data for in the first place isn't even compelling enough? So there's this dichotomy where you're like, I should just be focusing on trying to make the core game loop as good as possible, which has UI components in it as well, but it also has a bunch of other stuff. Or do you just try and take some of this peripheral stuff? So let me make it a little bit more tangible. In my game, people play the game, and it's like a multiplayer thing. And so when you play it, it's like a run. There's this concept of a run in roguelikes, and a run is like a short game where you have decisions and you make them, and you either win or lose, and after 10 minutes you can redo it. Most games that have runs, first of all, aren't a multiplayer game, so they don't store any of that data in the cloud at all. But second of all, they maybe don't even actually save it locally either. But in my game, one of the things that I wanted to do was effectively have a run history that's unlimited in the size it can be. So you can go back, theoretically speaking, and look at any of your old runs. And theoretically, since it's a multiplayer game, you could also look at other people's runs. The functionality to do that is definitely possible, but I've come to the conclusion I don't think I should even have that in the game, because it makes it too easy to effectively copy other players that are much better. Because this isn't a game with much execution at all. So if you just look at someone else's decision making that's like the highest rank, then it's like really straightforward, and you just emulate that, and it just completely flattens the curve of individuals learning. That was my main reason for not doing that. It's not that it couldn't be done, but anyways, so I was working on this run history, and this is where it's like this data problem. Now, the easiest thing to do with the run history is not to provide it at all. So a player loses every run they ever do, and this isn't that uncommon. A game that I recently played that was really good, Nine Kings, it doesn't have any run history. I don't know that it would benefit that much from run history. That's the big question, right? Does it even help with some of these things? Does it make it a better experience? But the point is that it doesn't have that, and that's a question, should you even have that? But when you're trying to explore the run history, which is just effectively data, you have an infinite amount that you can explore it. And so you pick an arbitrary threshold where you're like, all right, I'm not going to provide more functionality for sorting through this or finding certain things in it. But in my game, for instance, there's like a bunch of different animals you can play with, and there's some other items and stuff like that functionally operate like a Slay the Spire relic or something. And there's different like game modes too, to some extent. But at the most basic level, being able to move through your run history, something you would definitely like to be able to do is to get runs within a certain time. There are other problems with trying to allow a player to traverse a history that is effectively unbounded too. The most obvious one is, how do you render all of that information? And since you can't, how do you do it incrementally, which is usually called pagination, which is like something that's used in web-based JavaScript type stuff. They've been doing pagination for a long time, and there's different styles. The most intuitive one that everyone knows is scrolling and getting more data after scrolling. At some point, if you don't have an advanced scrolling algorithm that's removing stuff from the head of your entire queue or of your entire list of things, you're going to run into a memory problem. So for my solution, I just decided, and I wanted to keep it simple because I've actually tried to do that one in the past. But for this one, I was just like, I'll let them effectively scroll down and get more runs up until a certain point, in which case they're going to be forced to use more complex filtering mechanisms like a date range. Or what if you were interested in finding all the runs that you have that use a particular type of animal? What about trying to find all the runs where you get a certain number of wins? Since this is a Super Auto Pets type game, effectively the way it works is you play until you run out of life or health or whatever, and then you die. And your animals just get respawned every time. Exactly like Super Auto Pets, right? So that would be an interesting thing to potentially navigate and see. And then, so it feels like it's intelligent because it's against another human. It also feels like it's significant because it's against another human, but they're not actually there. And then it's asynchronous. But its synchronous version isn't really that interesting if you're doing the same thing. But when it is interesting is when you and your opponent can affect each other's strategies in a meaningful way. So the most obvious parallel here is in Magic the Gathering, there's the concept of drafting. And drafting is really interesting because when you're drafting, you don't have control over the deck that you're going to be using to play in a second phase of the game, which is very analogous. It's very applicable to my game. It works because in my game, you pick a deck of things and then you play with that deck of things. It becomes a roguelike after you've selected the deck, which I have some of my own thoughts about that. But effectively, you get to pick a deck. This is the general asynchronous mode that's the closest to Super Auto Pets. You pick a deck, and then you have randomness and a roguelike element, and you asynchronously play against other people. But in Magic the Gathering, there's an alternative way of playing, which is also possible in my game, where multiple players pick from a pool of cards, and then they battle after that against each other. So the roguelike element gets affected by the deck decision building stuff that you have over here. Now, if you play Magic the Gathering online on something like Arena, what you'll find is that it gets something really wrong, in my opinion, which is the main thing that's interesting about a drafting mode with other players is the elimination of certain things from the pool of cards. It's not about just picking the best things and just building your deck with whatever that is. It's about removing things from the set of options so other players can't use them against you. In Magic Arena, this isn't true. You draft with other players, but you don't play against those players, which doesn't make any sense to me, but it's a distributed convenience, and it's a lot simpler to solve it that way because effectively the drafting is synchronous, but everything after it goes into the exact same queue as the rest of the Magic gameplay was. But for me, I was like, what if I try and do this? And so I got myself all tied up in knots, and I haven't really made that much. I haven't gotten as far as I want with that, but I know that I want to do that, and I know that I'm going to try to do it because I have a really strong belief that's probably actually the longest, most replayable and interesting aspect of the entire game. So again, effectively, you draft with other people, and the set of people that you're going against doesn't have to be a fixed number. It could be like 2 or 4 people or 8 people. I wanted to do it all the way up to 16, I think. And that has to do with the number of cards in the deck. But then the other thing that's really different about drafting in my game is that there's only a single instance of any card, effectively. So if a person picks that card, nobody else from the pool can use it at all, which is really strategically impactful. And I think that maximizes the depth of that multiplayer interaction during the draft mode, where it's like you control other people's deck compositions a lot by your own decisions. But yeah, anyway, so that's like a type of game mode that I want to support in the game. But it's also, each time you play a game like that, it is going to still be just adding to your run history, but it's categorically a different type of experience and different type of game than like an asynchronous one. So if you go back to the run history and you're like, what if I just want to look at all the games that I played Queen Ant in that were also draft games? Are you going to facilitate that, allow that to happen, make it easy for players to get to that data? So anyways, that's the stuff that I was working on. Like I said, it makes you can't really predict how useful anything is going to be or what the future is going to be. But my general thought and my general heuristic about it is that it matters, and that making a really good game, just takes so much energy and time. And it's just not possible unless you're like super talented and have a bunch of other people with you maybe to do it in a quick time frame. I guess that's another thing I would say in this sort of rambling monologue after programming for 10 hours or something. I would say you can't rush this stuff. Like, design itself is not something you can rush very easily or very quickly. And even if you add a bunch of more people to the solution space, that doesn't mean that they're going to fundamentally improve the design. Because a lot of the time, design is more of a depth-first type of thing, where it's one person might have categorically some small idea deep into this, I don't know, delving into the game and the system and everything, and have some sort of new idea. I hesitate to say revelation or anything, but like effectively it's something like that. It takes more like a very specific type of neurological configuration which occurs when you interact with the stuff, the game, the program, the code for so long that you just start to have a categorically different perspective on things. And so it doesn't matter if you add a bunch of people, if all of those people are at a very shallow level of understanding, shallow level of information, like immersion, saturation within their neurons, within their mind, right? It doesn't matter that there's multiple minds if those minds don't individually have the correct saturation of neurological connections and comprehension about the problem. Those people are more helpful at solving like auxiliary problems that this person can't even do at all, like art or marketing or handling a totally different section of the game, right? Perhaps again, instead of focusing on like core game loop, focusing on UI or something. I could see someone, that sort of divergent paths being a reasonable thing. But anyways, I guess that's all I really had to say. It should be interesting for people who want to actually make a multiplayer game. It's definitely not, I feel like there's a couple different types of multiplayer games, and this has got to be like the most baby version. It has some difficult parts to it, especially if you try and do it really well. But it's not like the same thing as trying to make like real-time StarCraft-esque game, or on the other hand, like a first-person shooter real-time thing. That one game that's like I forget what it's called because I don't play FPSs, but it still stood out to me. It was like bit FPS, made by a small group of people, I think. And then there's like MMO RPGs and stuff like that. All of those are, honestly, they're all like categorically different. And I think that's partly why there's not a whole lot of confluence in terms of multiplayer video games on YouTube and the internet in general, is because they're very hard and they're very specific. And so it's unlikely that you're going to find someone who's actually even interested in doing the same thing. And but I guess if you're interested in, this game kind of resembles more of like just a startup SaaS type of thing, where you're thinking about how to persist data and how to transmit data, and then there's just like this weird game core loop in the background, which is obviously the most important part. It has elements of needing to be able to function inside of like a distributed cloud correctly and efficiently. That's got to be probably the part that I feel like could go the worst with this whole experiment, is just like provisioning servers. They can only service so many people, and if you don't get enough people, you already paid for it, and so you're losing money. You're burning money if you don't have a big enough player base, and the performance of your game goes way down if you have too many players. and you're susceptible to other things, just like malicious people that just want to DDoS you or something. It's just, but at the end of the day, it's, from my point of view, it's just easily the most interesting thing. I see so many of these single player games and I'm like, these are cool, but what if they were a multiplayer experience? And I'm not talking about what if they were like this really hacked together, barely functioning multiplayer experience, which is what you see a lot of multiplayer games on Steam are like, where it's, you get into it and it's, I don't know, it's okay, but it just doesn't feel, it feels like the minimal possible thing to qualify. And I think a lot of that has to do with the diminishing returns and the complexity of it and the expensiveness. Adding more stuff costs more stuff. For instance, going back to the run history thing, I'm losing money saving 1,000 runs for every person or more. A lot of people probably won't do 1,000 runs, but some people might, and some people might do even more, and that costs money, right? That's the problem with the cloud, is like, so I haven't really figured any of that out, and it might go catastrophically wrong, to be completely honest. But I feel like I don't really care that much. Like, I'm doing this, I think, largely just because I want to see what it's like and if it's possible. It's not so much about trying to find the path of least resistance, and it's not so much about like maximizing the probability of profit. It's mostly just, I can't imagine something being better than a multi-human experience. But there are some really good games out there that are single player. And I don't know if you could really take them and convert them to a multiplayer game, and maybe it would be worse. I don't know. And there's these weird middle grounds, like Slay the Spire is not a multiplayer game, but there's such a large community around it that effectively communicates through the internet about it, that it becomes a multiplayer experience in a different sort of way. It's not adversarially multiplayer, but it definitely generates a entire community around it. So I think in a way that's also a multiplayer. And I think lots of games do that nowadays. And then you don't have to pay, right? You don't have to pay for YouTube's videos. You don't have to pay for people streaming it on Twitch. But it's effectively still amplifying it and building more meaning, more significance, because people care about other people doing the same thing, right? But so I guess this has been super long, but yeah. Let me know if you want me to talk about anything specific. I always like answering people's questions. I like engagement, just like curious in general about what people think. And you can criticize me too. That's interesting. I haven't really gotten too much real flame or heat from people, but I don't think I would really take it too poorly. I'm like a super flawed person anyways, so but maybe there are things that I haven't even seen about myself that surprise me. Maybe, I don't know. Catch me off guard. Throw off my self-esteem a bit. Certainly happens to a lot of people on the internet. I think that's maybe one of the more challenging things for a lot of people is they're not prepared for the level of scrutiny. And by level of scrutiny, if we get back to that other idea where it's, if you have a bunch of minds working on the same thing, it maybe doesn't solve it faster. But if you have a bunch of minds and they all just point at one thing and they just, I don't know, criticize it, they're probably going to find chinks and flaws. Like, there's an army of people, and some of those people are going to be they're going to have an uncanny acumen for just social analysis or something. And God knows everybody is flawed. It's more so, I guess, with the extent of those flaws. But yeah, engagement of any type would be pretty interesting. I've gotten a fair amount of engagement, to be honest, and those people are pretty cool. So anyways, I guess I'll stop it here. So I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good evening.